A distant siren breaks the hush of midnight, its lonely song threading through the windows of a quiet apartment perched above the city streets. In that liminal hour, Evelyn sits at her kitchen table, hands folded around a cooling mug, the soft glow of her smartphone illuminating unread messages and a half-written email. Outside, shadows press against the glass, flickering now and then with the passing of headlights. She hears the siren grow louder, its urgency rising like her heartbeat, unraveling the fragile calm she has built around herself. Memories tumble forward. Her father's gentle warnings about fire and safety, the trembling thrill of building something out of nothing, and the relentless solitude that tagged her success. The scent of faint smoke invades, at first so subtle she doubts her senses, then sudden and real. A thudding in the hallway, neighbors rushing, voices muffled with panic, ushers in the truth. She hesitates only for a moment, collecting her purse and her composure, then steps into the corridor lit in jittery orange. Heat licks at the walls, distant but hungry, unsettling the air with promise and threat. Jack's radio crackles as he directs his crew into the aging building, the air dense with anticipation and the acrid promise of danger. He moves through the front doors in practiced silence, methodical and present, the weight of responsibility settling atop his shoulders. The halls are thick with smoke, every sound sharpened, the creak of wood, the muffled cries, the sweep of hoses behind him. Through the haze, a slim figure appears at the end of the corridor, moving with the stubborn grace of someone who refuses to panic, even as fear nips at her heels. He meets her eyes for a split second, steady gray, searching the mask that hides everything but kindness. "This way," he urges, guiding her hand to his sleeve, lending her his steadiness. The journey down the stairs is both endless and immediate. The velvet roar of fire below, the grip of her fingers, her breath shallow but certain. Outside, the night air slices through lingering smoke, cool and alive. She steadies herself, realizing she is safe, and in that space between disaster and morning, something unspoken passes between them. A silent recognition that grace sometimes arrives in the form of a stranger's hand, extended without expectation. Smoke drifted down the corridor in slow, teasing currents, curling along the uneven ceiling and reaching with ghostly fingers into each corner. Light from overhead fixtures sputtered, sometimes steady, sometimes trembling, as if uncertain it could outlast the heat. The building, older and graceful in its time, seemed to gasp with every new surge of fire somewhere above them. As Jack urged Evelyn forward, his other hand held his flashlight low, the narrow beam slicing through gray haze and painting their path in trembling white. Their footsteps landed soft on the carpet runner, now dusted with a fine layer of ash. The sound of distant alarms, sharp, mournful, echoed against the walls, broken by the quick reports of boots and shouted instructions in the stairwell beyond. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide for just a moment, at the crackle of flames behind a nearby door. The air prickled with heat, stinging her throat and fogging her thoughts. But through it all, she was aware of Jack's calm presence, the strength in the way he moved, and the patience in his voice, reminding her how to breathe, how to keep moving. At each landing, flickering emergency lights cast their shadows into long, wobbling shapes that shifted as people hurried past. Evelyn's world shrank to the rectangle of light from Jack's flashlight, and the warm, steady grip he offered her, something real, in a space now thick with unreality. She felt sweat bead along her brow, the fine tremor in her fingers betraying both fear and relief each time they turned another corner. The air grew thicker, uncomfortably warm now, filled with tiny cinders that glimmered on the shoulders of Jack's heavy coat. For Jack, the darkness and disorder were familiar, yet each rescue carried risk. A different face, a different vulnerability. He looked at Evelyn not as a stranger, but as someone entrusted to him in this moment. Each step carrying the quiet weight of duty. When they finally reached the main door, daylight broke through the haze. A cool, pale blue on the other side, sweet and impossible not to crave. Together, they stood for a second in that borderland. Evelyn holding her breath, Jack with a gentle hand over hers, before she stepped into the open air, her lungs aching and grateful as the chaos receded into distant sirens and cooling smoke. Outside the building, Evelyn found herself wrapped in an unfamiliar stillness, broken only by scattered echoes of urgency just beyond her sight. Shadows moved swiftly against the backdrop of flashing red and blue, firefighters' silhouettes darting in and out of view as beams of light flickered across the building's weary brick. The shimmer of reflective stripes and the hurried bobbing of helmets became a silent language over the hum of distant commands. Somewhere down the block, a bulky hose snaked along the pavement, glinting under street lamps that blinked through drifting plumes of smoke. Neighbors stood in small, uneven clusters at the edges of the sidewalk, faces puzzled and drawn, illuminated briefly by the rhythmic light of emergency vehicles. Evelyn caught snatches of motion, an anxious hand waving, a firefighter's quick nod, the curl of smoke rolling out an upper window, each fragment a swirl within the calm that held her still. In her ears, the sounds of panic were now muffled, as if the city itself tried to tuck disaster beneath its breath, making room for a softer kind of clarity. Jack, standing a measured step away, watched his team with practiced awareness. He spotted the hurried forms and caught the pulse of movement in the corners of his vision. A partner checking off names on a clipboard, another guiding a trembling child toward the rear doors of an ambulance. The world outside vibrated with purposeful disorder, doors opening and closing, radios spitting out clipped sentences, steam rising from slick pavement under the harsh flare of lights. Yet here, just to the side of it all, Jack noticed the quiet in Evelyn's posture, the way she hugged her arms around herself while staring up at her apartment window. He recognized a familiar expression, a mind tracing the blurry edge between what was lost and what might yet be won. The chaos seemed distant now, pressed behind glass and echoed through walls, reduced to glowing rounds of color and shadow that pulsed and ebbed with each passing second. For both of them, the night's violence faded at the edges, replaced by something gentle and uncertain, a space where fear gave way to reflection, and the silence invited a new kind of courage. Evelyn's hands trembled softly, a lingering vibration she felt all the way through her fingertips. The sensation was delicate, but uncontrollable, like the aftershocks of distant thunder. Her breath came in short, careful draws, each one a quiet negotiation with the air that still tasted faintly of smoke and uncertainty. She pressed her palms together, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat thrum against her skin. The simple act of breathing, the rise and fall of her chest under her thin jacket, the whisper of fabric brushing against her arms, seemed exaggerated, as if time moved slower just for her. In that moment, Evelyn was both grateful and off balance, her body remembering the heat and the fear, long after her mind tried to settle. With every inhale, the chill of the night crept in, raising goosebumps along her wrists, but warmth from Jack's quiet steadiness at her side seemed to anchor her in place. She straightened her spine, determined not to let the shakiness show to the onlookers or the firefighters who spoke in low voices around her. Jack noticed Evelyn's shallow breaths and the gentle shake in her hands. He remembered the first fire he walked into, how the world had thickened and slowed, every physical reaction heightened and raw. Now, years later, he still felt a bone-deep awareness during moments like this, a steadying effect, as if his own senses paused to make room for someone else's fear. Very gently, he offered her a bottle of water, holding it out with both hands and waiting without words until she took it. She gripped the bottle tightly, the cool plastic firm in her grasp, and managed a soft thank you that barely disturbed the silence between them. Jack stood close enough that she could sense his presence, a kind of shield in the uncertain air, without feeling crowded. As Evelyn sipped the water, her lips trembling just enough for him to notice, Jack matched her breathing in his mind, slower, deeper, leading by example. Their movements felt unhurried and deliberate, each physical detail magnified. Evelyn's slow exhale, Jack's reassuring nod, the weight of gratitude shifting quietly between them as the night stretched on. As Jack's radio crackled with new instructions, the quiet between him and Evelyn felt fragile, suspended. She watched the way his eyes flicked up at the voice calling through the static, and she saw the subtle tension return to his jaw. There was a kind of sadness in the gentle way he replaced his helmet, in the way he checked his gloves and the dirt that streaked his coat. Evelyn understood, almost before he said a word, that he would have to go back inside. Her heart skipped, gathering fear and gratitude at once. The memory of being led to safety, the grip of his sleeve, the sound of his calm voice, made the thought of him stepping into danger again all the more real. She reached out and touched his forearm just for a second, her touch saying what words could not: "Be safe, come back." The world around them blurred, the chaos and the urgency pressing in at the edges, while for just that instant she could not be certain if she'd see him again. Jack met her gaze, understanding without explanation the worry threaded through her silence. There was something about the way she held herself, a kind of wish, just beneath the surface, that he would be all right. With a steady, almost reluctant smile, he offered her the briefest nod, as if to promise that he would try. The moments stretched, weighted by everything that might happen in the minutes ahead, and yet bound by the hope Evelyn sent with him. As he turned and joined his team, she felt the chill of night close in, and the hollow ache of watching someone walk toward uncertainty. She wrapped her arms around herself, drawing on the strength she had summoned so many times in business meetings and lonely evenings, but now for something much more personal. In that second, Evelyn knew the world could tilt on one small decision, on the courage of someone willing to walk back into the flames, and she waited, heart pressed to the dark, listening for each update, each distant shout, holding on to the memory of his reassuring presence with a hope she could not shelter or set down. Earlier that evening, rain had begun to fall with a slow, rhythmic patience, tapping softly across the rooftop of Evelyn's apartment. The air was heavy, with the gentle hush of water, every drop a small comfort against the world's noise. Inside, the kettle on her stove whistled its own quiet greeting, steam billowing in wisps into the warm, close air of her kitchen. Evelyn moved with the familiar grace of routine, setting out her favorite mug, the one with the worn gold design on the rim, and spooning loose leaves into the strainer. For a few precious minutes, the scent of brewing tea wound through the space, fragrant and steady, blending with the petrichor drifting in from the cracked open window. She listened to the rain, steady and constant, and let her mind drift over old memories, childhood afternoons spent reading, the soft rumble of her father's voice, ambitions that shaped the lines of her life. The world outside was blurred, just shadows and shimmering streetlights, and inside, she found a fragile peace. She cradled the mug in both hands, feeling the ceramic's warmth seep into her skin. The kitchen clock marked time in quiet ticks, and the only other sound was the rain's uneven percussion against the glass above. Evelyn sat at her table, shoulders released from their usual tension, her eyes resting on the delicate surface of her tea. In the solitude, she let herself unwind, unhurried for once, as she reread a handwritten letter tucked beneath her phone. It was a small ritual, one she reserved for nights like this, when the weight of the day needed to be gently set aside. With every sip, the ache of responsibility faded, replaced by the simple comfort of being present in the hush. Outside, cars passed now and then, their headlights casting brief ribbons of silver along the walls, but it was the quiet, the rain, and the tender steam of her tea that claimed her thoughts. Before the siren, before the smoke, Evelyn had this moment. A pause, a breath, a shelter she kept for herself, never knowing how much she would soon need its memory. Inside the fire truck, before the call, Jack and his crew moved through their routines with practiced ease. The space hummed with the subtle music of camaraderie. Boots thudding, zippers closing, radios checked and set aside. One of the younger firefighters, Brett, fumbled with his gear, and a soft chuckle rippled through the group. "Still fighting with that harness?" someone teased, and Brett grinned, shaking his head as he got it straight. It was the kind of exchange that drew a smile from even the quietest members, a quick joke that carried years of trust underneath. Jack caught his lieutenant's eye, exchanging a nod that needed no words. A simple acknowledgement, reassurance that everyone was ready, even as nerves flickered just beneath the surface. There was strength in these small moments, in the way they all knew what the others needed before anyone had to ask. Minutes later, as the truck rolled to a stop in front of the burning building, words fell away, replaced by the measured silence that always came before stepping into danger. The team gathered at the curb, listening to the first assessment on the radio. Jack's gloved hand rested for a moment on Brett's shoulder, giving it a quick squeeze. Nothing showy. Just a signal. "I've got you." Their captain scanned the crew with a silent question and received a series of nods, calm and certain. Together they moved, each falling into place, with the instinct that only comes from facing chaos together. At the threshold, the roar of the fire waited, but just before they entered, Jack shot his team a tiny, almost private smile, a last flash of normalcy and unspoken encouragement that said, "We'll get through it." In that breath between the noise outside and the heat inside, they drew on the steady trust, built from countless small gestures over the years, a shared silence that spoke of loyalty, courage, and the quiet promise of coming back for each other. In the split seconds before stepping into the fire, as Jack adjusted his helmet and checked his gear, a quiet thought surfaced, a memory tucked into the lining of his jacket. He carried a folded note in his inside pocket, the ink faded from so many days pressed against the warmth of his chest. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a thank you card from an older woman he'd once helped after a kitchen fire, her neat script still legible. Your kindness meant more than you know. Jack had meant to clear out his pockets weeks ago, to toss the note with the other small tokens collected over the years, but somehow, it had stayed. Sometimes, in the hush that fell between the shouts and alarms, he'd find himself running a finger along the edge of the paper, as if reminding himself why he came back, why each rescue mattered, even when the story behind it faded for everyone else. He never spoke about it to the crew. To them he was dependable, steady Jack, always ready for the next emergency. But inside, that paper softened him, an anchor against the chaos. As the smoke curled along the edge of the stairs and his boots caught the crunch of cinders, Jack's mind drifted back to the simple words written in blue ink. On nights like this, when the risk was real and the outcome never promised, he let himself absorb just enough comfort from the memory. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures stayed with people for years, sometimes forever. He wondered, fleetingly, if tonight's rescue would leave someone else with a need to say thank you, or if Evelyn would remember the way he'd offered his hand through the haze. The note in his jacket didn't weigh him down, it lifted him, making the worn, heavy gear easier to bear. Jack stepped through the next doorway, hopeful for all the moments he had yet to share, quietly believing that the truest courage often ran parallel with the gentlest acts. A smile, a thank you, a note he hadn't thrown away yet. The radio flared to life, splitting the close, uncertain quiet, with sharp bursts of static. Engine 1, possible entrapment, north stairwell, repeat, possible entrapment. The words were crisp, heavy with urgency, and instantly every motion sharpened in response. Jack exchanged a knowing glance with his lieutenant, nodding once, their silent rhythm unbroken, even as the world around them swelled with tension. He could sense the crew's minds click into focus, feet moving faster, voices lowering into purposeful hums. The building's outer walls bore the flickering promise of heat, casting long shadows and bathing the entryway in fiery gold and black. Through the hiss of the radio and the distant crackle of flames, Jack's boots found their place on the scorched threshold. Time felt elastic, stretching between the static of the message and the pounding rush of adrenaline, each second drawn out, each breath filled with the expectation of what they might face inside. He led the team forward, vision framed by smoke and darting beams of flashlights. The stairs groaned underfoot, littered with ash and fragments of the building's lost calm. Another burst from the radio cut through the melee. Unknown number, possible elderly resident. Jack's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the protective urge that always surfaced when the stakes rose higher. Behind him, Brett's voice was barely above a whisper as he relayed information, staying close. The air thickened, growing heavier and hotter, the scent of burning wood and melting electrical cords mixing with the tightened clarity of focus. Every tool, every motion took on new meaning. Now, somewhere, someone waited, maybe afraid, maybe alone. Jack signaled for his team to split, moving with careful precision, boots echoing in the stairwell, and hands ready for whatever the night demanded. The radio static faded just enough to let him hear the pounding of his own heart, the trembling possibilities ahead woven into the smoke and urgency, pressing them all forward with a hope too stubborn to be left outside. Jack's eyes, usually warm and unhurried, flickered with new intent as he heard the confirmation over the radio. The gentle presence he'd shown outside, his calming nods, steady voice, the patience that reassured both Evelyn and his crew, was still there, but now sharpened by purpose. His gaze, sweeping the stairs, was quick and unyielding, every detail suddenly crucial. The way the smoke clung to the walls, the patches of deeper darkness that might hide a fallen figure, the sound of his own breath behind the mask. Jack felt the familiar surge that always came at these moments, when compassion pressed right up against danger, and every second mattered. He moved with certainty, signaling for Brett and the others to check the far end of the landing. With each gesture his hands grew more deliberate, his movements economical and precise. The anxiety he carried for those outside became in an instant a different kind of strength. Focused energy, narrowed vision, the quiet resolve that would not waver until everyone was accounted for. The change was not loud or sudden. A transformation, rather, honed by years of repetition and trust in himself and those around him. Those calm, patient eyes became tools now, searching through haze, catching the briefest flicker of light against glass, or the telltale movement behind a partially closed door. In the heat and rush, Jack found a clarity that belonged only to these moments. He called out, clear and concise, his words measured to cut through confusion and fear alike. Any hint of doubt or hesitation was washed away by the urgency of the call, replaced by a steady drumbeat in his chest and the low hum of determination in his mind. As he pressed forward, searching for the source of the call for help, Jack was aware, in a distant part of himself, of the burden that came with leadership, the knowledge that his focus, his choices, were what brought people home. For that reason, his eyes, the same eyes whose calm had comforted Evelyn minutes before, now carried a sharper truth. A readiness to face whatever waited in the flames, drawn by the power of responsibility and an affection for strangers he knew only in the moments that mattered most. Jack's ritual before entering the heart of the smoke was always the same, simple acts repeated, until their comfort became instinct. He tightened the straps of his gloves, pulling the leather snug around each finger, feeling the slight burn of fresh adrenaline in his palms. The familiar weight of his helmet settled over his hair, and with a practiced twist, he clicked the chin strap into place. The sound, soft, decisive, was reassurance itself, a mark that the line between vulnerability and focus had been drawn. With every motion, Jack checked and rechecked his gear, collar adjusted, jacket zipped high, mask ready but just off his face for now. Each action was deliberate, almost reverent, a way to carve out control before walking into uncertainty. He could hear Brett a few steps behind, mimicking the same movements, both men caught in the brief, silent space before commitment. Now, standing at the threshold, Jack drew a breath, steady, deep, but held for a moment before letting it go. There was always a hush here, a thin pause that separated the world outside from whatever waited inside the burning walls. He glanced once at his hands, flexed inside the gloves, remembering old lessons about readiness and resilience. His helmet sat heavy and secure, the brim shadowing his eyes as they narrowed with purpose. Around him, the air felt close and humming, filled with the anticipation that only those who have prepared for battle, in countless small ways, could understand. Jack's gear was more than just equipment. It was routine, promise, and a shield built through years of facing fire and fear. As the last click of a buckle echoed off tile and smoke, he gave a final nod to his team. With every piece in place and every breath accounted for, Jack stepped forward, trusting the ritual to hold back the chaos, ready to lead with the calm resolve he'd crafted, one quiet, steadying gesture at a time. The familiar warmth of the firehouse, filtered lamplight, nearby laughter, the lingering scent of coffee and clean laundry, began to slip away as soon as the alarm sounded. In the brief scramble that followed, Jack and his crew snapped into action, each movement smooth from years of repetition. The big bay doors groaned open, letting in a rush of sharp night air that prickled exposed skin and stirred the edges of every anticipation they carried. With gear hefted on broad shoulders and boots thumping against concrete, the team piled into the truck as a soft chorus of voices faded behind them. Jack swung into the passenger seat, his body humming with adrenaline, the memory of warmth from the common room already receding. He watched the headlights pierce the growing dark, and for a fleeting second, let himself miss the safety and simplicity of that golden-lit room. The fire truck rumbled to life, red lights bouncing off city windows, siren wailing into the empty hour. As they rolled out onto the road, the cold pressed against the glass, making everything outside feel distant. Buildings silent, trees swaying in the sweep of wind, sidewalks abandoned but for the glint of rain or frost. The truck sliced through the night, its motion sure and unyielding, each rotation of the tires pulling Jack and his crew farther from comfort and farther into the unknown. Inside, breath fogged on chilled windows, gloved hands gripped metal rails, and silent glances were exchanged, everyone burying the last remnants of heat from home. Jack looked at his reflection in the window, eyes sharp, jaw set, and felt the divide between two worlds, the safe, ordinary one that lived in warm rooms and laughter, and the urgent, necessary one that waited just beyond the red glow of their lights. Between those two, he chose to step forward, each journey into the cold darkness, a quiet promise to meet whatever the night would bring. Inside the fire truck, silence settled between the crew, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of wipers slicing rain from the windshield. Each firefighter rode in his own small world, private thoughts hidden behind stoic faces and gloved hands resting quietly in laps. For Jack, The passing blocks outside the window turned into a ribbon of old recollections, holiday mornings cut short by calls, quiet suppers that ended in abrupt departures, the faces of people he'd helped fading and returning in the dim shape of the city lights. He held still, the gentle roll of the truck rocking him back and forth, mind wandering to memories both heavy and light, his father's steady voice before his own first late-night emergency, the crumpled thank you notes tucked away, the echo of laughter from dinners with friends he saw too rarely. Every sense was kept sharp by habit, but his heart lingered on what waited beyond the headlights and sirens. Even Brett, the youngest among them, sat lost in thought, eyes flickering between the dashboard and the dark slice of road ahead. He remembered the people from his own hallway, neighbors he'd only nodded to but would search for in tonight's chaos. Behind his careful expression, anxiety and hope twisted together. Jack noticed these quiet spells in his team, the hush of readiness, the sorrow and pride carried between calls. Someone cleared their throat but didn't speak. Another shifted, the hiss of fabric loud in the contained space. Each person carried something of their lives into this silence, a message not yet sent, a promise made before leaving, a brief memory of laughter or grief that surfaced like breath held too long and finally released. In the shared hush, Jack found comfort and weight, understanding that the silence was not emptiness, but a gentle gathering of courage, reflection, and the small, stubborn hope that what they did would matter, not just for tonight, but for the stories still to unfold when the sun returned. The quiet inside the truck was broken only by the measured rhythm of the engine, and the steady pulse of warning lights reflecting in glass. Yet even in this hush, every firefighter's mind played out scenes in anxious clarity. Jack's thoughts stitched together images born from memory and worry, flames curling up wallpaper, licking at ceilings, swallowing rooms faster than anyone could run. He saw fire climbing stairwells with impossible speed, the air turning thick and black, heat bending metal into twisted shapes. He imagined doors swollen and jammed shut, hands pounding on the inside, the sharp panic of voices lost behind choking smoke. These weren't just fears. They were lessons from years before, scars that shaped every decision. Jack ran through the rhythm in his head. Check for windows, count every landing, trust the voice coming through the radio. He pictured himself forcing a door, coughing in the heat, hearing the distant collapse of a roof or the muffled shout of a teammate needing help on another floor. Brett and the others saw their own versions. Someone trapped behind a dresser-turned barricade, a pet barking from a window ledge, families hunched on balconies with nothing but hope between them and the flames. Even with the best planning, Jack knew each call could turn in a heartbeat, routine shifting to nightmare with a single misstep. The youngest in the group pressed his gloved hands together, thinking of instructions given again and again. Stay low, feel the handles, work as a single line. Jack's jaw tightened, eyes locked on the streaks of rain that blurred the city lights, his mind battling the urge to get there faster and the fear of what they might face. He silently promised those waiting, strangers for now, but not for long, that he would not let their worst night end in isolation or loss. For every mile ticking past, the imagined obstacles grew, hallways closing in, old wiring sparking overhead, someone's grandmother or child on a floor the map didn't name. And yet they pressed forward, not with bravado but with a quiet, practiced courage that lived in forethought and preparation, steeling themselves for whatever waited at the curb. As the city flickered past in watery streaks of light, Jack's gaze drifted to the world beyond the windshield, but what he saw was miles away from here and now. In the hush and anticipation of the ride, a memory floated forward. His mother's kitchen, sunlight pooling over the countertops while she sliced apples with careful, gentle hands. He remembered the soft sound of her humming, an old song she used for comfort, and the warmth of her arms when she hugged him before he left for his first shift. "You come home safe," she'd whispered, voice feather-light but carrying the weight of years spent worrying for someone else. Jack recalled how he nodded, bravado crisp in his reply, but her touch lingered. A small anchor of safety that stayed with him through every call, every return, and every near miss. It had been months since he'd last seen her, time crowded by duty and distance. Yet in the moments before stepping into danger, her presence bloomed inside him, quiet and unyielding. He remembered another goodbye packed with hope and longing. A late summer evening, amber sunlight melting behind rooftops. He'd stood by the sidewalk with the woman he once thought he'd spend his life with, their words careful, every gesture clinging to the patience and understanding love, sometimes needed, to survive absence. She'd traced the line of his jaw in the golden light, her eyes bright with dreams for both of them, and promised she'd wait for the next morning, the next message, the next long walk home. But seasons changed, as they always do. Their lives bent around work and worry, and the demands that never seemed to soften. There was no blame, not really, just the slow drift of two people trying to be strong without each other. Even now, the memory of her laughter in his arms, the smell of her hair when she leaned close, pressed in with the rain and engine noise, a reminder that hope and heartbreak traveled with him, always present beneath the layers of gear and the steady calm he wore for others. As the truck neared the blocks swelling with lights and desperation, Jack's heartbeat aligned with the rising thrum of the siren. Battered by old memories and the sharp fear of what he would find tonight, he squeezed his gloved hand into a gentle fist and looked down for a breath, centering himself. Images flickered in his mind. People he hadn't reached quickly enough, moments lost to the speed of flame or the limits of human strength. But then came Evelyn's face, flashed in memory, and now threaded through the uncertainty of the coming minutes. Steel gray eyes full of hope and utter vulnerability, the brief trust she'd laid in his hands. In that fragile picture, Jack found his answer, silent and certain. He couldn't change what was gone, but could shape what happened now. A quiet vow lit inside him, more than a promise, a steady refusal. Not this time. Not her. The truck slowed, the world narrowing to the urgent dance of shadows and piercing color outside the windows. Jack's mind pushed aside wreckage from the past, letting his focus settle on the task before him. He pressed the backs of his knuckles to his helmet in a fleeting gesture, half salute, half prayer, anchoring his heart to the moment. The vow grew weight and purpose as he scanned the chaotic scene. No, he would not let tonight become another chapter of regret. In every step, every word he would speak, he carried Evelyn's hope and his own resolve as a shield against the darkness they were about to enter. His feet hit the curb with new intent, joining the swirl of movement and strained voices, eyes searching for a sign. He was more than prepared. He was determined, strengthened by the ache of all he'd lost, and the slender thread of this one night's fragile faith. In that silent promise, Jack became more than a rescuer. He became the line that would not give way, for her, for now. When the fire truck rolled to a gentle halt, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Rain fell in light ribbons, softening the edges of chaos, dampening the ash that floated in the yellow spill of streetlights. Neighbors clustered together near the curb, wrapped in jackets and blankets, voices a low murmur of shared concern. Faces pinched by worry searched the building's windows for movement, for hope, for the familiar outline of a loved one appearing through the haze. Children held the hands of parents, teenagers stared at their phones without seeing, and an older man pressed a handkerchief to his mouth, each waiting in the same tension that caught the night's air. There was gratitude in their glances when Jack and the crew stepped down from the truck, hope knitted into a silent chorus. "We trust you. Please help." The building itself loomed uncertain, its brick damp and shining, lights within flickering unevenly, a living thing unsettled, not yet overcome. At the entrance, the front door hung half open, as if the building itself was undecided between surrender and resistance. Soft smoke, nothing more than a pale veil at first glance, drifted out into the rain, diffused and tamed for the moment by cool air. The threshold was scattered with small marks of urgency, a dropped shoe, a forgotten purse, the smear of a handprint on painted wood. Jack paused, reading the story in those signs. Someone left in a hurry. Someone might still be inside. The quiet worry of the neighbors hovered with him, their breath visible in the chill, their silence swelling between each encouraging nod and whispered prayer. The fire inside was still hidden from view, more suggestion than spectacle, its presence revealed only in the trembling light behind a curtained window or the too-still hush that settled around every pause. Jack stepped forward in this gentler chaos, mindful of every tender detail, greeting a neighbor with a reassuring glance, touching the doorframe to steady himself, and let compassion guide him over the threshold, comfort and courage bound together in each careful move he made. Jack stepped lightly over the threshold, his boots meeting wet tile, and the world shrank to the cool hush between him and his team. Without a word, they fanned out, each person slipping into a role as naturally as breathing. His lieutenant eased left, eyes flicking over doorways and feeling for heat through the backs of his knuckles, while Brett angled toward the stairwell, shoulders low and close to the wall. Jack skimmed his beam over the baseboards, searching for subtle movement. Another firefighter lifted a hand in a signal, a twist of light, not a sound exchanged. In the thickening gray, gestures did all the talking. A hand pressed flat against the air meant wait, a quick bob of a helmet gave the all clear, or the warning to pause. The building was holding its breath too, and every step was measured, no noise wasted. They checked their radios, mumbled confirmation just above a whisper, but mostly moved with the quiet assurance built by trust and repetition. The language of their teamwork was in every action, the way one would reach for a tool at precisely the right moment, how another slipped a wedge under the door to keep it from closing, the almost imperceptible way their eyes tracked each other's progress. The floor creaked under their weight, but the team adjusted, flowing down hallways and pausing beside doors, where smoke curled thin and secret around frames. Even the smallest movement seemed coordinated. A flashlight swung just so, a glove paused on a doorknob, a nod that asked, "Ready?" and received an answer before the question was finished. Jack caught Brett's eyes in the dim, reading not just readiness, but a mutual promise. No one would be left behind, everyone would be seen and counted for. It was practice and instinct, hope and history joined together in a series of practiced, intuitive movements. In this silent ballet, the danger was real, but so was the unspoken bond that made bravery possible, worn smooth by countless nights like this, in too many different doorways, with too many different names waiting to be called. Moving through the smoky hallway, Jack's flashlight caught the edge of a small scorched frame on the floor, a photograph nearly lost beneath the soot and fallen plaster. With a practiced glance behind him to check the team, he paused just long enough to pick it up. The glass was cracked, the edges blistered with heat, but through the haze he saw two blurred faces caught mid-laughter. A woman's gentle smile, a man's hand wrapped loosely over hers. Something in the woman's expression tugged at him, a familiar tilt of the chin that reminded him of Evelyn. The same resilience, the same quiet hope. Jack brushed ash from the corner, feeling an unusual tightness in his chest. For a second, the urgency of the fire faded, replaced by a wave of memory and longing. His mother's kitchen, the way his lost love had smiled at him in the half-light of dusk. The picture was not his own, but the grief in its ruin felt universal, a silent link to every loss the fire sought to erase. Just then, through the shifting smoke, came what sounded like a name whispered, soft, almost a sigh stretched and carried by panic and hope. Jack turned quickly, heart thumping, listening as the syllables tangled in the air. Through the haze he could just make out the faintest outline at the far end of the hall, the suggestion of movement from a shadowed doorway. The voice called again, weaker now. Jack couldn't be sure if it was real or only desperate memory, the building's sorrow mixing with his own. He clutched the burned photograph, feeling the brittle hope pressed between glass and paper, and let the sound draw him forward. Every sense sharpened, the way the floor listed beneath his boots, the bitter taste of smoke on his tongue, the thump of his team's careful progress, merging with the frantic pounding of his own heart. With each step, the photo in his gloved hand became a quiet promise, a vow not to let another memory dissolve into ashes, not if he could help it, not tonight. Jack stood for a moment at the edge of the smoke-filled doorway, gathering himself in the flicker of uncertain light. The threshold was more than scorched wood and peeling paint. It was a border drawn between the comfort of what he knew and the wild, shifting dark of the unknown. He took one last look over his shoulder. The street, the gentle glow of streetlights haloed in drizzle. Neighbors' worried faces turned his way. Behind him lay order, routine, and the echo of laughter from nights spent safe and whole. In front, shadows curled and beckoned, thick as memory, sharp as loss. He felt a pulse of fear move through him, old as his first fire and just as real. But underneath it bloomed stubborn hope, the belief that courage meant stepping forward even when certainty lagged behind. With a steadying breath and the photograph still cradled in his palm, Jack pressed his boots into the gloom, knowing this crossing was more than duty. It was a choice, each step rooting him deeper in purpose. Inside, the world became both smaller and more significant. The air closed around his head and shoulders, heavy with heat and the scent of burnt wood, yet alive with the small, persistent signals of others, his team moving patiently, the faint call of a life yet to be found. Every movement forward was a quiet defiance, a declaration that hope mattered, that the lost comfort of before need not vanish completely in the teeth of chaos. Jack led with his heart as much as his hands, the photograph a silent vow to everyone waiting, mourning, or simply dreaming of rescue on the other side of the flames. In the wavering light, his body appeared as nothing but shadow and outline, yet the resolve that carried him across the threshold glowed quietly within him. Each breath was a recommitment, every pause at a branching hallway, a chance to choose hope all over again. Crossing into fear, he moved forward not by banishing it, but by letting hope walk beside him, a promise whispered from memory and held fiercely against the dark. The deeper Jack moved into the building, the more physical the fire's grip became. Smoke curled down from the ceiling in thick, greedy fingers, making every breath an act of willpower. His mask filtered most of it, but not the bitter taste lingering at the back of his throat, a sharp mix of scorched wood and melting plastic, cut only by the faintest memory of rain from outside. The air itself felt heavy, pressing down on his shoulders, blurring the edges of the hallway, until every detail shimmered with movement or threat. He listened to the hungry roar in the walls, that roaring punctuated by the unsettling groan of beams overhead, warped and resentful from the heat. Each step was calculated, his boots brushing past debris and slick patches where water and soot met in a slippery mess. Feet slightly apart, he tested each board with his weight, feeling for the tremor of a floor giving way to fatigue and flame. Shadows swayed against the walls, cast by the nervous dance of firelight through open doors and broken windows. Jack's flashlight swept across peeling wallpaper and scattered photographs. Personal artifacts turned strangely fragile in the uncertain dark. Every few steps the structure protested, sending showers of dust and a cough of embers from above. The sound of a distant beam splitting echoed faintly, raising the hair on his arms even under the sweat and heat trapped by his jacket. He felt the air quiver whenever another section shifted, warning him that his time here was measured not just by courage, but by the stubborn architecture still holding together overhead. Static from the radio pierced the noise, a tinny thread through the otherwise relentless pulse of danger. But above all else, Jack was aware of the house's own voice, its aches, its cracks, its plea for rescue. Surrounded by choking smoke and the creaking, wounded bones of the building, Jack pressed forward, reminding himself that within this peril there was something, someone, still worth finding. Inside the trembling, smoke-shrouded halls, Jack forced his breath to follow the steady pattern drilled into him by years of training. In for 4 counts, out for 4, a mechanical rhythm he clung to, despite the ragged edges of fear scraping at his chest. His instincts guided his hands, one always trailing the wall, the other searching ahead, knuckles brushing against heat and damp plaster. Yet even as his body moved with discipline, his heart thudded hard against his ribs, a primal drum calling him to hurry, to find, to save. Each inhale was both reassurance and necessity, a shield against panic, while his mind tracked every sound and every shift in the darkness, a hiss from a burst pipe, the hollow echo of falling debris, the elusive cry that kept him pushing forward. On the outside, Jack moved with focus and control, but on the inside, urgency surged, feelings loud and urgent beneath the practiced calm. With every step, Jack balanced 2 worlds, experience and emotion, instinct and hope. He tuned in to details most would miss, a faint draft through a half-open door, the trembling of a photograph as he passed, the difference in temperature that warned of fire nearby. He relied on the muscle memory honed through hundreds of emergencies, letting training shape his response. But the stakes, the memories of past rescues and regrets, carved a rawness into the moment that no routine could ever really erase. He fought to keep his breathing slow, to still the racing narratives in his head. What if I'm too late? What if she's just beyond reach? With each measured exhale, Jack willed his emotions into a kind of courage, not to banish them entirely, but to use their sharpness as motivation. The fire was not the only thing testing him now. It was the weight of the past and the hope of the present, the impossible tension of a calm exterior alongside a heart pounding fast for a life not yet found. Jack's gear was soaked through, sweat, water from burst pipes, a cold slick clinging to his back and soaking down his legs inside the fire-resistant material. Each layer, meant to protect, now felt twice as heavy, pulling at his limbs with every crouch and reach. His shoulders ached under the constant burden, the jacket's seams pressing into his collarbone, his mask fogging with each exhale. Breathing hurt, every inhalation stung his lungs, air thick with the bitter cocktail of smoke and chemicals. It felt like breathing through damp cotton, heavy and resisting, and it took every ounce of willpower to keep his mouth sealed to the mask, not to gulp for air out of desperation. Muscles protested as he pushed onward, each movement slower, more deliberate as exhaustion crept into every joint. The radio's voice faded in and out, another background sound lost in the roaring fire and the crash of timber above his head. He pressed forward, boots slipping over wet tile, padded with ash and debris, every step measured and calculated. Each time he lifted a foot, the pull of his waterlogged gear threatened to throw off his balance. His knees trembled and his thighs burned, a relentless, heavy ache. And in that pressure, Jack felt the gap between human effort and hope, the stubbornness that made him keep going when his body wanted to stop. He bent to check under a bed frame, cold water soaking into his gloves, fingers stiff and slow as he gripped a fallen beam to move it aside. Sweat rolled into his eyes, raw and stinging, adding another blur to the fog inside his mask. But Jack's movements never lost intention. Each push, each staggering step was an answer to the fire's threat. He would not yield to exhaustion. Focusing on the rhythm of his steps and the memory of the photograph in his pocket, he let pain and fatigue fuel him. In that struggle, Jack found his truest strength, a strength shaped by hardship and steadied by a will that refused, even in the most punishing heat, to back down. Near the corner where dim light met swirling smoke, Jack saw her, fragile but fiercely present. The woman sat on the edge of a faded armchair, knees pulled tightly together, one trembling hand clutching a delicate silver locket at her throat. Her business jacket was smudged and singed at the hem, hair loose from its careful style, pale face streaked by ash and fear. In the harsh, uncertain light, she looked half lost and half defiant, as if refusing to let either flames or fate decide her ending. The room around her was in disarray, scattered paperwork, broken glass underfoot, memories fleeing with the heat. Despite the roar of chaos around them, it was the softness of her eyes that pinned him, the way they widened when she saw his mask and gear, flooding with a hope he'd witnessed on many nights but never stopped feeling. She raised her free hand, not with a cry but a desperate whisper, calling out as if afraid her voice might shatter what fragile calm she had gathered. The locket trembled in her grip, knuckles white against its tarnished chain, as though it held every promise and every goodbye she'd ever spoken. Eyes the color of stormy steel met his through flickering shadows, pleading, grateful, utterly present. In that silent moment before he spoke, Jack saw all the stories pressed behind her gaze, the weight of leadership, the loneliness stitched into long hours at a desk, the yearning for something steady to hold on to. He knelt, ground crunching beneath his boots, and extended a steady hand, palm up and open. For an instant, the world shrank to their shared space, her fragile composure colliding with his resolve. Their connection was wordless but whole, a promise carried in a gaze, a memory pressed into metal against her chest, a hope fragile as breath but strong enough to survive even this night. The world around Jack and the woman began to contract, the upper floor groaning with an ominous warning as the very bones of the house surrendered to flame and exhaustion. Somewhere above, a beam cracked with a sharp, thunderous split, its sound echoing through blistered walls and bouncing down the trembling staircase. The air grew thicker by the second, every fresh plume of smoke warping their vision and coating their skin with an oily, choking film. Breathing became harder. Jack's chest rose and fell in sharper, more urgent bursts while he kept his posture low, desperate to find pockets of cleaner air. He reached gently for the woman's wrist, voice calm but edged with the urgency of now. "We have to go. Right now." His words were nearly swallowed by the coughing roar of fire, the background soundtrack of disaster speeding up with every heartbeat. Even as the woman rose, swaying slightly, cradling the locket and searching Jack's face for reassurance, another beam collapsed somewhere deeper in the house, a thundering, splintering sound that sent a shudder through the floor. The ceiling above them flexed with each impact, seams quickly darkening, flakes of paint and plaster dancing down through the haze like snow. Jack's hand stayed steady at her back, guiding her past the crumbling edge of the armchair, past a toppled lamp, and toward the only visible light breaking through the smoky murk, the hallway door. The fire was no longer just an enemy to resist, but a tide coming for everything in the room, and the way forward narrowed to a single urgent hope, the promise that if they moved together, now and without hesitation, they might just cross back into the world of rain and lamplight and breathe again. Every step became a test of determination, the fire rushing closer, and the past dissolving in its greedy advance, forcing them to trust in each other, in the next lungful of air, and in the smallest, stubborn flicker of light guiding them out. A wave of stifling heat funneled down the hallway as Jack and the woman stepped out of the ruined room, walls shuddering with every distant collapse. He could feel the fire's hunger close behind them, pressing the air tighter, thickening each breath until it scraped like sandpaper down his throat. Ahead, the corridor forked. One path led straight to the faint outline of a stairwell they'd passed moments ago, now barely visible behind a curtain of smoke. The other curved deeper into the building, towards safer air, but required crossing an unsteady patch littered with debris. Jack's instincts screamed for speed, every lesson yelling, "Get out now!" But he paused when he heard the woman's choked gasp. She clung fiercely to his sleeve, her strength surprisingly steady despite her shaking frame. Her eyes, wide and pleading, darted between the paths, and she pressed the locket to her lips, whispering a name. Someone he guessed was still missing inside. Someone she would not abandon if there was any spark of hope. Jack's heart thudded, torn between what duty demanded and what compassion offered. He could hustle her to safety, ensure at least one life made it into the clean rain waiting outside, or he could risk everything and follow that unspoken request, search for the person the woman still hoped to find. The walls screamed with heat, and time shrank with every new groan from above. Jack weighed the risks, reading her desperation, feeling the truth. Her gratitude for rescue would never outweigh the regret of leaving someone behind. He glanced toward the safer path, then back to the uncertain dark, mind racing with calculations of fire spread and structural danger. He drew a breath, squeezed her hand, and, against every survival reflex, chose to take the risk for her sake. "Show me. Quickly," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside. Together, they turned into the uncertain gloom, driven not by fear, but by the stubborn hope that if even one life might still be saved, that chance was enough. The journey back through the battered corridors became more than just a flight from danger. It was a struggle towards something new, every step peeling away the layers of fear and exhaustion. With Jack leading, his grip firm yet gentle on the woman's hand, they wove through the stifling haze and falling debris, ducking bursts of embers, and the trembling arc of collapsing walls. The world behind them narrowed and dissolved, the roar of the fire growing fainter, replaced by the rhythmic thump of their feet and the pulsing hope that waited outside. For a moment, each stride was an act of faith, placing trust in Jack's steady presence, believing that even as the house buckled and spat its last fury, there was something bright and clean on the other side. The hallway seemed to lengthen endlessly until a burst of rain-cooled air, sharp as memory, reached Jack's face. He squeezed the woman's fingers, found her gaze through the ash and nodded. "It's time." With one final surge, they slipped through the battered front door, stumbling out into the electric hush of emergency lights pooling in the rain-swept street. The cool air wrapped around them, shocking and new, lungs burning but grateful as the taste of smoke faded from their mouths. Firefighters moved toward them, jackets shining under the drizzle, voices blending into a chorus of gentle encouragement and relief. The woman stumbled, clutching her locket, and Jack steadied her, both of them anchoring each other in the sudden stillness of survival. Outside, the world felt impossibly wide, the air full of a promise neither fire nor fear could erase. For Jack, every sound, the wail of sirens, the murmur of neighbors, the soft fall of rain on his skin, felt like a beginning. They stood side by side, reborn by the ordeal, changed by the passage, through flame and back into life, each heartbeat echoing with the truth that hope, once chosen, could never fully be undone. As Jack and the woman made their way through the battered hallway, the path to safety seemed almost within reach. He kept his body angled protectively, sensing the fatigue in her careful steps and the heaviness in the smoky air. But then, in that uncertain blink between hope and relief, the floor beneath them shuddered and split with a sudden, violent crack. The ground buckled, boards snapping underfoot, and the world lurched. Before Jack could brace himself, he felt his boots sink and pitch. His arm shot out, catching the woman just as she gasped and tumbled toward the jagged hole opening at their feet. Her locket flashed in the chaos, swinging from her neck as she clung to his wrist, the shadows of flame rising hungrily beneath them. A cry tore from her lips, sharp and raw. Desperation, fear, everything she hadn't let herself feel until now. Jack's heart hammered, muscles burning, as he gripped her hand and anchored himself against the unsteady wall. For a split second, panic grazed his mind, a flicker of doubt, a memory of all he might yet lose. But his training snapped back into place. "Hold on," he called, voice rough but unbroken, above the clatter of collapsing wood and the growing roar down below. Inch by inch he pulled her up, bracing his feet against whatever strength the splintered floor had left to give. Sweat and soot streamed down his face, the weight of both woman and gear threatening to tip the balance, but he did not let go. With a last, wrenching effort, he hauled her back into the light and onto stable ground, both of them trembling, breathless, their faces inches apart as the danger below snapped shut. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound their frantic breathing and the distant, relentless climb of the flames. But in that silent ache, they understood. Even when hope almost gives way, sometimes all it takes is refusing to let go. As the floor settled into uneasy stillness and Jack helped the woman to her feet, another shadow loomed at the edge of the hallway's smoky veil. Brett, face streaked with sweat and soot, emerged without a word, his flashlight beam cutting a reassuring path through the haze. The shouting on his radio grew urgent, but Brett's focus was absolute. He reached out, catching Jack's shoulder in a firm, steady grip, anchoring them both at a moment when Jack's arms trembled from effort and fear. In that single practiced touch, Jack felt the strength of their years together, trust honed in long shifts and tested in fire after fire. With the woman's hand wrapped tight around his, Jack nodded back, relief and gratitude passing through the squeeze of their gloved fingers, a silent conversation carved in pressure and understanding. Brett moved ahead, mapping the safest line through the debris, his presence a beacon in the frantic dusk. Suddenly, Brett jerked his chin toward a window rattling loose in its frame, a patch of clean, rain-lit air just visible through dirty glass and the tangle of falling ash. He ripped at the sash, jamming his shoulder beneath the warped pane until it creaked open, letting a rush of wet night pour inside. Oxygen and hope filled the small space as Jack boosted the woman up, helping her climb toward the narrow gap. Brett steadied her from the other side, murmuring encouragements as she slipped over the battered ledge and spilled into the waiting arms of firefighters below. The storm outside seemed to reach in, promising safety and a new beginning, its steady fall a welcome relief from heat and despair. Jack followed last, boosted by Brett's rough grip, the two exchanging one last nod of partnership before Jack dropped into the world of sirens and rain. Free at last, surrounded by guiding hands and gentle voices, he drew a deep, ragged breath, the kind only possible after surviving what almost was lost. Once outside, the turmoil behind them slipped quickly into the gentle hush of night, the world calmed by the steadiness of rain and the distant, muted swirl of flashing lights. Fresh air wrapped itself around Jack and the woman in cool, clean relief, settling on their burned faces and sticky clothes like the softest promise. She drew a shaky, delicate breath, each gasp letting go of more fear than smoke. Her hand, still clamped tightly in his, trembled at first, then steadied, finding reassurance in the living proof that they had made it out together. Around them, the chaotic calls of the firefighting crew became distant, replaced by the quieter sounds of neighbors murmuring, blankets being pulled tighter, and the peaceful rhythm of water rolling down the street. For a few precious moments, no one spoke. There was space for silent gratitude, for a glance that said what words could not. Jack knelt briefly at her side, still holding her hand, even as paramedics came forward. Their touch gentle but determined in searching for injuries, checking breaths and pulses. Through her parted lips came only a soft gasp, a fragile echo of both exhaustion and awe. Her steel-gray eyes locked onto his face, searching for their own reflection of hope. Water mingled with ash on their skin, descending in steady droplets that washed away panic and framed the moment with unexpected tenderness. The relief was deep but subdued, a shared understanding that sometimes survival settles not in victorious shouts, but in the quiet squeezing of hands, the thunderous hush of life reclaimed. As she finally released his grip and nodded, the smallest smile played at the corners of her mouth, telling him that she would carry this moment, and his presence, with her long after the smoke had faded and the sirens were gone. For Jack, there was contentment in the silence and the coolness of the evening, in every breath he took beside her, knowing that quiet hope could be as powerful and enduring as the bravest act of rescue. As the cool night air pressed in, Jack watched the woman closely, all the chaos of rescue boiling down to small, hopeful signs of life. For a split second she remained motionless, her body curled in on itself, shoulders shaking with the echo of fear and exhaustion. Jack bent lower, heart drumming louder with every silent beat, until he finally saw it, her chest rising and falling, shallow but certain, delicate puffs of breath passing between ashen lips. Each inhalation, however soft, was a promise. She was here, she was real, she had not been taken by the smoke in the dark. He let himself exhale, the ache of uncertainty loosening from his frame. Every movement became precious, the flutter of her eyelids, the shudder that rolled through her shoulders, a faint but steady squeeze that tightened around his fingers. Hope lived in each flicker, fragile but insistent against the world's worst. Her hand moved next, at first no more than the tremor of a leaf in autumn wind, then gathering purpose as she lifted it from her lap to her throat, searching for the familiar shape of the locket. The chain slid under her fingertips, and she gripped it tightly, grounding herself in that familiar weighted presence. Jack recognized the ritual, the way she drew reassurance from simple contact, and he softly guided her upright, steadying her as she struggled to process sky, rain, and the sudden expanse of freedom. Paramedics hovered, waiting for a sign, and as she blinked slowly beneath the streetlight, her hand found Jack's one more time, fingers curling with intent, holding him close for an extra heartbeat before letting go. That single deliberate motion, her hand moving, her breath settling, life resisting the cold, told him everything he needed to know. She had chosen to hold on, to come back, to find herself in the world again. The rescue was not only won in fire and chaos, but in these smallest gestures, movement, breath, and a hand searching for hope in the darkness. As the night settled and the adrenaline ebbed away, the woman's body betrayed the emotion she had fought to contain. Her knees bowed under her weight, buckling as the shock of survival caught up to her all at once. She knelt on the wet pavement, the coarse texture of the road gritty against her palms, hands trembling uncontrollably. Rain mingled with the streaks of soot smeared across her skin and clothes, and the cold only seemed to sharpen her senses, bringing every sensation into trembling focus. Unable to stop herself, she let go of the locket just for a moment, pressing both hands to her face to catch the tears that broke free, hot and unchecked, carving clean lines through the gray. The deep ache of fear, the surge of relief, and the crushing exhaustion all tangled together, overwhelming what little composure she'd preserved inside the burning building. Jack crouched beside her, one hand resting gently at her shoulder, the steady pressure meant to anchor her to the now. He saw the way her whole body shook, fingers stretched and curled, knuckles white, shoulders rising and falling in ragged sobs she no longer tried to hide. Soot clung to the curve of her jaw, tears making muddy trails along the hollow of her cheek and into the fabric of her jacket. He recognized this moment, the breaking open that came after the worst had passed, the body finally allowed to feel loss and relief in equal measure. Without words, he handed her a clean cloth, the simplest gesture possible, and remained close enough that she could lean into his presence if she needed. The world was still loud around them, voices, sirens, and the ever-present patter of rain, but for an instant, time let her grieve and feel, release and recover. There, on the slick city street, she let the weight of survival pass through her shaky hands and burning lungs, honoring what she'd lost, and what still remained, turning tears into the first sign of true healing. Around them, the world felt impossibly wide and intimate all at once. There were no cheers, no applause waiting for their return, only the quiet chorus of rain and the muffled shuffle of feet as firefighters regrouped in the street. Smoke drifted in faint swirls from the battered building, mingling with mist and the distant flicker of emergency lights. Neighbors huddled close, their faces drawn with lines of worry and hope, but nobody celebrated. Instead, what passed between the gathered souls was a powerful, shared awe at the violence of the fire, at the hard-won survival in its wake, and at the fragile, ordinary miracle of each breath reclaimed. In that silence, the tragedy and the rescue existed together, woven tightly as the dampness that clung to everyone's skin. People wiped their eyes not out of triumph, but from the echo of fear just survived, and for a heartbeat longer, sorrow and gratitude pooled together in the hush. Jack stood near the woman, their bodies close yet separate in their private reckonings. The silence was thick, full of unspoken words and the weight of all they had carried. Losses counted, memories scorched, and hope salvaged in spite of it. He looked into the faces of his fellow firefighters, reading in them the exhaustion and grief, familiar to anyone who has braved darkness and brought someone back. No one tried to fill the moment with comfort that would not fit. No one asked for victory. Each person honored the ordeal in their way. With a bowed head, a slow exhale, a lingering hand on a friend's shoulder. There was comfort, even awe, in surviving what could not be controlled. In the closeness that crisis creates without asking. As the rain fell in steady sheets and the night air cooled, Jack and the woman stood together in the shared quiet, their hearts learning how to be full again, in the presence of other wounded, grateful souls. This was not celebration. This was the sacred pause after disaster, where grief and awe breathed gently side by side, needing no words at all. The ride back to the firehouse unfolded in a quiet so deep it seemed to absorb the noise of the engine and the sharp scent of scorched clothes. The team sat in their usual seats, faces streaked with soot, eyes settling on the dark stretch of road rolling beneath them. In the old rhythm of return, no one spoke. Words would have seemed out of place next to what lingered in the air, a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and the secret tally of losses and saves. Jack looked out the window, city lights blurring past, his own reflection barely visible, but his thoughts vivid. The woman's trembling hand, the way hope fought through fear, the shared stillness of grief on the street. Every firefighter nursed private wounds and quiet triumphs, hearts heavy but whole, carried together in the gentle sway of the truck as it turned for home. In the hush, the weight of the night pressed down but also softened, affording each of them space to breathe and start to heal. As the firehouse came into view, windows glowing softly against the rain, the crew's unreadable faces revealed just enough. Set jaws and relaxed hands, shoulders dropping inch by inch, posture easing as adrenaline faded and memory took hold. For Jack, the silence was both shield and confession, filled not with emptiness, but with meaning. He thought of the woman's eyes, the grip of her hand, the sacred hush of survival shared without need for celebration. They would talk later, process the night in pieces around the kitchen table or in quiet corners before sleep, but for now this stillness was its own kind of communion. No stories were needed, no voices raised or comfort forced. Every man and woman carried the same quiet fullness, the cost of what was risked, the grace of what was spared, the unspoken promise that they'd face it all again when called. In that collective stillness, with faces unreadable and hearts deeply, wordlessly full, they rode on, together, changed and alive. As Jack sat surrounded by the quiet hum of the returning fire truck, his mind circled back to a single crystalline moment in all the blur and chaos, a memory that sparkled amid the soot and exhaustion. He saw again the way the woman had looked at him when the world seemed to be collapsing. Her steel gray eyes finding his despite the smoke, a pleading hope flickering through the shadow of fear. In that fleeting glance, she had given him more trust, more vulnerability than 100 words could have. There were sirens wailing, beams cracking overhead, heat pressing close enough to steal breath from their lungs, yet in the midst of it all she met his gaze, and something passed silently between them, an understanding, a spark of defiance, and the will to hold on just a little longer. That look became his anchor, sharper and brighter than any instruction from the radio, or cry from another room. On the ride home, that unspoken moment echoed through his memory, calling forward everything he had ever believed about human connection in the middle of fear. In her eyes lived the story of everyone he had ever tried to save, and in them he saw his own fears reflected, softened, and returned as hope. It was a glance he would remember longer than the heat or ache, a reassurance that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was just the act of looking back, refusing to give in, and letting someone else see the truth behind the struggle. That memory stayed with him as the truck rocked gently and the city slipped by outside. Her gaze, her silent thank you, the promise he kept by not looking away. It was a moment, simple and small, that carried the weight of the entire night, echoing quietly through his heart and settling there as both ache and peace. Later that week, after the city had returned to its ordinary rhythm and the firehouse settled into quieter shifts, Jack found himself driving home along streets made gentle by dusk. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and new, the treetops wet and shimmering under the glow of streetlights. Without intending to, he turned at a particular corner, one he barely noticed most nights, and slowed as he approached a familiar address. Her house stood calm, its windows lit from within, golden light spilling onto the porch to chase away the deepening shadows. The porch light in particular was bright, unblinking, a beacon against the memory of smoke and emergency. Jack paused at the curb, engine idling, and looked up at that gentle glow. It was an ordinary sight, easily overlooked, but to him, it was a message, a quiet, "I'm here," a soft statement of survival, of life moved forward after disaster. In that small pool of light, Jack saw more than a fixture or a habit. He thought of the night they had emerged, side by side, into the rain, of the grip of her hand, the way hope and fear mingled in her eyes, the precious quiet of shared survival. Now, seeing her porch alive with warmth, he realized the rescue had not ended with the fire's retreat. It lived on in the way she returned to her home, in the simple act of switching on a lamp against the dark. Jack didn't linger. He respected the privacy of that returned peace, but as he drove away, he carried the image with him. The porch light a steady answer to all those silent questions that follow a rescue. It said everything that couldn't be spoken through official reports or radio calls, that sometimes, the smallest acts, turning on a light, opening a door, are the real victory, and that courage isn't just in braving flames, but in choosing, night after night, to keep the darkness at bay. It was a few days later, just as the hum of everyday life began to settle over the firehouse, that a small, unexpected gesture arrived. Jack returned from a routine call to find an envelope waiting at the edge of the kitchen table, his name printed in fine script beside a pie wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. The note inside was brief, just a few lines in her neat hand, offering thanks, gratitude, and a wish for good meals after hard nights. She didn't try to say what couldn't be captured by words, but she included a single, quiet phrase, for when you need a reminder that kindness outlasts fire. The pie, a classic recipe, the sort meant to be shared, carried the warmth of a home reclaimed and a life stitched back together, each bite a gentle bridge from disaster to comfort. The whole crew gathered around, breaking into quiet smiles as they served each other slices with steaming mugs of coffee, passing around the letter and letting its sentiment linger in the soft clatter of forks and low laughter. That same evening, after the meal and beneath the low golden bulbs that lit the station, Jack paused and lit a small candle beside her letter, an old ritual revived, a nod to all that had been lost and all that yet endured. The candle's flame danced between shadows, simple but persistent, just as her porch light had glowed steadily through the hush of night. For Jack, the act was more than habit. It was a message back to her, though she might never see it, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond formed in fire and carried through recovery, proof that connection outlasts crisis. As the pie plate emptied, and the candle's soft light blurred at the edges, the firefighters let the quiet close in, grateful for both rescue and reunion. In the end, it was not the blaze or the fear that lingered, but this, shared letters, shared food, shared hope, and the steady flame of kindness, carrying them all a little further beyond the dark. After the warmth of shared pie and laughter faded into shadows, Jack found himself alone at the edge of the firehouse kitchen, the hush of midnight settling around him. The candle's uncertain flame cast his broad shoulders in flickering gold, and his hands, scarred, calloused, marked by stories, rested flat upon the table. He studied them in the gentle glow, tracing lines through soot and old burns, nails flecked with reminders of the night's labor. For a long time he sat motionless, the quiet pressing in until the echoes of sirens and smoke felt like a distant memory, and only the rhythmic pulse of gratitude and regret remained. Those hands, so capable and strong in chaos, trembled just slightly now that the world had been made silent and still. He flexed his fingers, feeling the ache return as memory rather than pain, haunted by what might have been lost, but overwhelmed by the realization of what had been saved. He thought of the woman's eyes, the way relief and sorrow had mingled on her face beneath the streetlights, the echo of her soft grip lingering as surely as the scars on his palms. So much of courage, he realized, was lived out in moments no one would ever see, quiet gestures, silent vows, a willingness to reach for another hand in the dark. Jack breathed in the faint scent of pie and melted wax, feeling both full and hollow, as if kindness itself was a weight to be borne. In the solitude of the kitchen, beneath the slow dwindling of the flame and the heavy stillness of after, he sat grateful for the bond that had formed in fire, and haunted by every shadow his hands could not reach. The world outside remained wide and uncertain, but Jack stayed, staring at his hands, content and haunted, letting the moment settle as both tribute and prayer, a silent thank you for the light that remained, and a gentle farewell to the darkness that would always linger at the edges. As the days slipped quietly past and life settled into its careful patterns, the memory of that night remained woven through both Jack's and Evelyn's lives. Each went about their routines, changed in the tiniest ways. Evelyn pausing a moment longer at the mirror, brushing her fingers over her locket before facing the day. Jack watching the city lights flicker into dusk from the window of the firehouse, thoughtful in his stillness. Scarred walls and healed bodies faded into the background, but the feeling of having been seen and saved, by a stranger, by a single moment of bravery, did not. Their paths rarely crossed, yet something gentle and true threaded between them. A glance when they passed in the neighborhood, a candle lit in a distant window, the shared quiet of gratitude and understanding whenever their thoughts returned to flame and rescue. That bond became its own kind of shelter, an invisible bridge between two lives restored. In quiet moments, both reached for this truth, letting it soften the edges of regret and fear that lingered from that smoky night. They knew now what so many never could, that even the worst hours could be redeemed by the simplest kindness. A knock in the dark, a steady hand reaching through fear, a promise kept long after the fire faded. The wounds of that night did not disappear, but neither did their courage or their hope. As Jack lingered alone in the kitchen, and Evelyn traced her locket, with careful fingers by candlelight, each understood that rescue was never just about survival, never only about pulling someone from the flames. It was about finding meaning in the struggle and connection in the moment you needed it most. In their solitude, and in their shared history, they carried a truth the fire had revealed and the quiet had sealed. Some rescues save more than a life. For all the days and weeks that followed, the world slowly reclaimed its ordinary rhythm. Emails waited to be answered, appointments resumed, and the city outside Evelyn's window swept forward as if nothing had happened. But for her, there was never a true return to the life from before. The crack in the wall had been repaired, the lingering smell of smoke faded, yet some gentle part of her heart stayed altered by a single night's reckoning. She moved through her home differently now, inviting in light, opening windows even when it rained, and lighting a candle most evenings just to watch its small, steady glow. Some nights the memory of flame, its heat, its sudden hunger, the way fear clung so thick, rose again, sharp and real, pressing almost close enough to steal her breath. She would pause, let that shadow settle, and hold the locket at her throat, reminded not only of what was nearly lost, but also of what was found, when the world reached out with open hands. Still, what lingered with her most was not the chaos or the roar, but the unmistakable knock that had broken through the smoke, certain and alive in the midst of terror. That sound, a promise in disguise, had carried through closed doors and trembling silence, unlocking a stubborn hope she didn't realize she'd been missing. She remembered the fire, the flash of light under the door, the rush of footsteps, the way the air grew thick and heavy with each passing minute. But most of all, she remembered the knock, steady, human, impossible to ignore, the signal that help had come, that she was not alone in the dark. And in that quiet truth, night after night, she found herself rescued again, long after the flames had faded, by the memory of an ordinary signal in an extraordinary hour, a reminder that sometimes what we remember most isn't fear or even survival, but the gentle way hope finds its way in.